Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this legislative assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions.
Mr. Speaker. The member for Edmonton Middlelark.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to present a petition on behalf of parents in Edmonton who are concerned about equity and fairness with respect to the busing of school children to French immersion programs in the city of Edmonton.
And receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Private Bills Committee has had under consideration certain bills and reports as follows. The committee recommends to the Assembly that the following bill be proceeded with. PR 3, the Canada Olympic Park Property Tax Exemption Amendment Act 1989. The committee recommends to the Assembly that the following bills be proceeded with some amendments. PR 1, the Canadian Union College Amendment Act 1989. PR 4, the Edmonton Community Foundation Amendment Act 1989. PR 5, the Misericordia Hospital Amendment Act 1989. PR 6, the Calgary Research and Development Authority Act 1989. And PR 11, the Thank you, Mr. Speaker. PR 11, the Tammy Lynn Proctor Adoption Act. The committee also recommends to the Assembly that the following bills not be proceeded with. PR 10, the Margaret Kenford Adoption Act. PR 12, the Jerry Dan Kovacs Legal Articles Act. And PR 13, the Sherry Lynn Adam Adoption Act. I would ask, Mr. Speaker, for the concurrence of the Assembly in this report.
You heard the motion. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave today to introduce two bills to the Assembly. The first bill being 253, Arts Board and Arts Council Act. Mr. Speaker, it's particularly a pleasure to introduce this bill in the middle of summer festivals in Edmonton, as this bill would permit an elected arts board, including peer juries, to adjudicate arts funding applications. The bill enjoys wide support amongst Alberta artists, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands has moved first reading of Bill 253, Arts Board and Arts Council Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 253, Arts Board and Arts Council Act, introduced by the honourable member, Ms. Barrett, is now read a first time.
Speaker, the second bill I would like to introduce is an act to amend the Interprovincial Lottery Act, Bill number 256. Mr. Speaker, this is a simple bill. Its effect would be to require lottery revenues go into the General Revenue Fund of the Alberta government to come before the Assembly of Alberta before spending decisions are made in consideration with the annual budget estimates. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, it not only overturns last year's Bill 10, but improves the prior scenario on this matter.
Member for Edmonton Highlands has moved first reading of Bill 256, an act to amend the Interprovincial Lottery Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 256, an act to amend the Interprovincial Lottery Act, introduced by the honourable member, Ms. Barrett, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table with the Assembly the following annual reports. The Public Health Advisory and Appeal Board for the period August 1, 1987 to July 31, 1988, and the Provincial Mental Health Advisory Council for the period July 1, 87 to June 30, 1988, and copies will be distributed to all members. As well, I'm pleased to file with the Assembly the audited financial statements of the Alberta Children's Provincial General Hospital for the year ended March 31, 1989, and also I'm pleased to table response to motion for return number 184.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
I'd like to file the copies of a petition or letter to the Alberta government by 550 residents of Legal and Morinville proclaiming their dissatisfaction with the long-distance charges to call each other, whereas they can call Edmonton free, a rather undesirable development, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Decoy.
Introduction of special guests.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to introduce to you and through you to members of the legislature 5 people who are here in support of the petition that I introduced to the legislature earlier today. They are Dennis and Colleen Gagnon, along with their 3 children, Justin, Colin, and Deneen. I would ask that the members of the legislature welcome them in our traditional fashion.
Member for Lesser Slave Lake.
I rise to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly, President of the Board of Directors of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada and his wife Helen, Mr. Morris Lazarovich, who are from Western Canada visiting our great province from Hamilton, Ontario. I would like them to stand as they receive the warm welcome of the Assembly. They are seated in the members' gallery.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Premier is spending our money shielding mortgage rates, frankly, to cover up his failure to influence federal interest rate policy. Mr. Speaker, when his federal cousins cut our transfer payments by some $200 million over the next 5 years, he said basically the federal budget was okay. Mr. Speaker, the government failed, the provincial government failed to do full assessments needed to protect our health and environment, so now the feds are involved. Mr. Speaker, now we're faced with a regressive federal tax that the government never fought when it had a chance during the federal election, Mr. Speaker. Right. Now it says it's going to fight, Mr. Speaker. Late. Frankly, I don't think there's any fight left in this government, Mr. Speaker. That's right. But my question to the Premier, rather than just words, will the Premier tell us exactly what his government is going to do from this day forward to fight this regressive tax?
Well, I guess, Mr. Speaker, there's 3 points should be made. First of all, the honourable member's allegations leading into his question are full of nonsense. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, the Alberta government was the first government in Canada who identified the problems with the national sales tax and which has led other provinces and other groups in opposing the national sales tax. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, surely the honourable member would know that you would not telegraph in advance the strategies you're going to continue to use in fighting something.
This is a public debate.
That's right.
That people want to know, Mr. Speaker. All I hear is words. I'm asking the Premier to lay out a program. What is he specifically going to do to fight this program? Are we going to be talking about after January the 1st, 1991, Mr. Speaker?
That's the way it looks.
Mr. Speaker, the government, of course, has been able to very effectively focus national attention on this sales tax and has been able to create changes in terms of how the tax might impact on energy, how it might impact on houses, how the visibility of the tax is developed, and has brought to the attention of other governments the matter of jurisdiction. This government is not only providing leadership, this government is making changes happen. We'll continue to do it in the most effective way we feel is right.
Right. Maybe the Premier's in a time vacuum, Mr. Speaker.
Looks it.
Mr. Wilson just announced the program, Mr. Speaker. He just announced the program. But my question is a very specific proposal because we believe this is serious for Alberta families and the province. Would the Premier take, as a suggestion, having an all-party committee from this legislature that would serve to mobilize public opinion in Alberta and put pressure on Ottawa. Would you look at that suggestion?
Great idea.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there is an all-party committee right here in the legislature, but I should point out the government has mobilized the people of Alberta on this issue very strongly, and they are supporting us in a very large way.
Precisely.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Technology and Telecommunications. Mr. Speaker, last Thursday on August the 3rd in this Assembly, we witnessed another typical example of this government hiding behind a veil of secrecy. Mr. Speaker, I'm of course referring to the government's refusal to release two recent reports on the financial prospects of General Systems Research. Mr. Speaker, it's a matter of record that the Alberta government has put in over $30 million of government help to try to put this company on a sound basis, Mr. Speaker. And as a result of that, this government has a responsibility to be upfront about this money and what's occurring with this company, Mr. Speaker. But when the minister was asked, my colleague, and on the answer, Mr. Speaker, for an estimate from my colleague, the member from Edmonton Kingsway, about how much this is going to cost over the next 5 years to make this company viable, the answer was, I think this is totally hypothetical. Well, Mr. Speaker, the minister knows full well this is not hypothetical.
That's right.
Will he tell us now? Will he come clean and tell us now what the estimated cost for the taxpayers of Alberta will be over the next 5 years to make this company viable?
Mr. Speaker, the question as put to me by the honourable member did not set any sort of premise in respect to the basis of calculations of the profits or losses or how it would factor in the type of financial assistance that has been given, nor the types of new market potentials that have been established by the company in areas of both the laser cutter and the aerospace. And that is why, and I stand behind the answer to the question as given to the honourable member during the estimates.
Mr. Speaker, that's gobbledygook, and the minister knows it.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, is it not true that the Touche-Ross report says $26 million more will be needed, injected into GSR over the next 5 years in order to make it viable? Do you deny this?
Mr. Speaker, the Touche-Ross report dealt with only certain aspects of the operations of GSR, and in particular, just the aerospace industry. The total picture was not taken into account by that particular report. We continue to monitor and closely monitor the situation with GSR and as an ongoing basis receive reports and look into and make sure that every opportunity is taken to make sure that GSR has that opportunity to become a viable company. It is assessing its options very closely at the present time, and we're working closely with them.
Mr. Speaker, if you'd released the report, we could find that out. But we know they said $26 million. That's right. Mr. Speaker, is it also not true that this particular report, the Touche-Ross report, said that the government will need to make a decision shortly on whether to extend financial support to GSR or have it placed in receivership? Is that not what they said?
Mr. Speaker, I think the reference to looking at things shortly is important because of the recent changes in the company through both contracts with Boeing and McDonnell Douglas on the aerospace side with new potential there, as well as a recent sale of a prototype laser cutter to the Russell Corporation of Alabama. And in the light of those two circumstances, it would be important to reassess the market opportunities for this company.
Agreed. Member for Edmonton Glengarry, followed by St. Paul, then Edmonton Strathcona.
Speaker, the stars are in the right alignment again. Good for the questioner and good for the person answering the question. The former Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs says that the Premier cancelled a task force. Former Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs says that the Premier cancelled a task force that she planned to set up to deal with FIC and AIC in 1985. The Premier, in a statutory declaration, claimed that it was only in 1987 that he learned that some government action might be necessary with respect to FIC and AIC. My question to the Premier is this: why did the Premier not include in his statutory declaration to Code the fact that the former minister informed the Premier that some action would be necessary on FIC and AIC in 1985 by establishing a task force?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure how many times you want me to reply to the same question in this session. However, that's basically the same question that the honourable member asked previously. These matters have been dealt with fully by Mr. Code and as well fully by the government's response to the Code report.
The moons are out of order. Mr. Speaker, given that the statement made by the former minister directly contradicts the Premier's statement in his statutory declaration as to when he knew action might be necessary on FIC and AIC, I'd like to ask the Premier whose version is wrong.
Mr. Speaker, again, the honourable member is repeating essentially the same question. This matter was dealt with in quite some detail in the government's response to the Code report, where I dealt with first the memorandum having to do with financial institutions, and secondly with my sworn declaration. Mr. Code had both, and obviously Mr. Code found that there was no discrepancy at all in these comments.
Mr. Speaker, my final question to the Premier is this: will the Premier tell us if it is only coincidence that in the same year that he prevented the task force from being formed to investigate FIC and AIC, he also received a very large donation to his leadership campaign from the Cormy family?
It's really kind of sad, Mr. Speaker, to see the honourable member who becomes so devoid of issues to debate and discuss on a normal level in this legislature has now lowered himself to that kind of a question. I might point out, Mr. Speaker, that the actions that the government has taken with regard to Mr. Cormy and his companies hardly could be classified as something being done as a favor.
Member for St. Paul, followed by Edmonton Strathcona.
My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Transportation and Utilities with respect to the signing of the Yellowhead Trans-Canada Highway. In light of the fact that the Yellowhead received its Trans-Canada designation in 1986, why did we wait till August 1989 to unveil the signs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the unveiling of the signs that occurred early this week were at the request of the Yellowhead Highway Association and its many volunteers. And what they were attempting to do, as I understand it, and I assume that was the reason for the delay between the year 1986 and 1989, was to ensure that with the designation of Highway 16, the Yellowhead route, that they did not lose the Yellowhead designation, that it would be also a part of the Trans-Canada North or Trans-Canada number 16 highway signing program. And I'm pleased to say that we were pleased to have the Deputy Prime Minister with us to unveil that sign because of his efforts to assist us in getting it originally designated, with the many, many months of work by the Yellowhead Highway Association and its members from British Columbia through to Manitoba.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, can the Minister tell us how long it will take to put up the new signs along the new Trans-Canada route and what the approximate cost will be?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it'll probably take us around 2 weeks in Alberta to put up the signs. That's the Trans-Canada, the green sign with the white maple leaf and the number 16 in it. Approximately 2 weeks. It'll take us a little longer to work with what they call the Trailblazer sign, which was the old Yellowhead Highway route, Mr. Speaker, with the number 16 in it. I did mention in answer to that question to some members of the media that it could take up to 18 months, and that includes from Winnipeg right through to Vancouver, because at the present time we're having some difficulty with British Columbia designating the Trans-Canada in British Columbia. But as far as Alberta is concerned, it'll take approximately 2 weeks to put the signs up here. The approximate cost will be I believe between $35,000 and $50,000.
Considering the scenic beauty of the Yellowhead route and the flow of tourist traffic into surrounding areas, could the minister inform us when twinning will be completed?
Mr. Speaker, I'm really pleased to answer that particular question because we are on target. The west section, which is from Edmonton to the area just west of Hinton, is to be completed by 1990, east from Edmonton to the Saskatchewan border by 1991, and the only delay that could occur is weather. That's W-E-A-T-H-E-R.
Thank you very much. Edmonton Strathcona, followed by Edmonton Whitemud, then Lesser Slave Lake.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Attorney General. He has steadfastly refused to tell us, Mr. Speaker, what, if any, steps in the way of laying criminal charges his department has been taking against the principal players in the principal fiasco. One of the ways open to the citizen to do their own checking, Mr. Speaker, is via searching at the courthouse or courthouses on executed search warrants. This is a basic right, Mr. Speaker, that has fairly recently been pronounced on by the Supreme Court of Canada, as I'm sure the Attorney General knows. Fact is, Mr. Speaker, the department has virtually removed this ability from the citizens because if a citizen goes to the courthouse, there's no index there, no staff to look through the daily folders, and the citizen can't do it himself. My question, therefore, is why has the department effectively removed this basic right from the citizens of this province?
Mr. Speaker, first I'd like to ensure that the member from Strathcona is aware that the full force of the law will be brought against any of the players in the principal matter, and with the fullness of time, the actions will be commenced. In regard to the search warrants are in many ways an invasion of a person's privacy prior to a person being properly accused through the courts of doing any wrong. And on that basis, quite often the judge who hears the police officer on the request for a search warrant has the document sealed. When it's sealed, no one in the court administrative service knows what's in that envelope that's sealed. Only the policeman and the judge know. Once there is a seizure or an action commenced with a cause of action and an information laid, the documents can be unsealed, but again an application has to be made to the court to have that unsealed, because again the administration does not have the right to do that. In the event that a search warrant is issued without being sealed, which is totally in the discretion of the judiciary, that document is held in file, but it's held in file in safekeeping, in privacy, until such time again that there's evidence that is seized and a cause of action starts. That's done for two reasons. One, in the search warrant, there's a number of pieces of information in there that could relate to a supposed crime. It might relate to informants. There's a number of things, as well as the name of the person who is being searched. That is held in privacy, and I think that is the ultimate aim of keeping search warrants not secret, but in safekeeping.
Mr. Speaker, a fine answer to a question I didn't ask. The question is about the index. Mr. Speaker, on the 14th of June this year, the Attorney General told this House, "We are using and developing the best modern technology to meet the needs of Albertans in every aspect of the administration of justice." Since he has failed so signally in this aspect of justice, Mr. Speaker, my question is, why does the minister say one thing and do another? Is it part of his job description as a cabinet minister in this government?
Looks that way.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so happy that the honourable member read out answered my comments, because they were very, very true. We do use technology to the best use for all citizens of Alberta. The member, who obviously and his colleagues don't want to hear the answer, thank you. didn't listen to the last part of the first answer, which said that there is a reason for search warrants to be kept in safekeeping until such time that an action is commenced. Once the action is commenced, the accused at that stage has a copy of the search warrant. If that person has any problem, wants defense counsel, has some problem with the way the search warrant was initiated, they can go to their counsel. An action number is then given to the file, and the document again is public unless the court has got it sealed. Then the other side, if it's not sealed, it's given an action number immediately, and again there's access. Now, the reason for anybody finding that particular document, aside from the person who is being accused or the person who wishes to defend them, is beyond me.
Well, in that case, the Attorney General is arguing with the Supreme Court of Canada, Mr. Speaker, and so my question is, seeing we can't find it in the index, perhaps the Attorney General would simply tell us what warrants in connection with the Cormys or others in the principal fiasco have been executed, search warrants.
Let's hear it.
Mr. Speaker, as I just finished saying, I fail to see the need for anybody to have, unless they're involved in the case. If they wish to go over and search the files, they, by a particular name of an accused or a particular action number, the document is available. If they don't wish to go through that process, I fail to see why the administrative bureaucracy should be streamlined to provide snoops.
Member for Edmonton Whitemud, order, please. Order. Order. Edmonton Whitemud.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in light of this government's poor track record in regard to openness and accountability, it is no surprise that Albertans have become cynical about the purpose and administration of the Community Facility Enhancement Program. Numerous attempts by Liberal MLAs and citizens of Alberta to obtain information about either specific applications or general program background that have met with outright refusal, which leads me to a logical conclusion, that is that the Community Facilities Enhancement Program is nothing more than a Tory cash cow to bolster support for Tory MLAs. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Public Works: will the Minister explain to this House and to the people of Alberta why this government has made it impossible for citizens of this province or their elected representatives to access comprehensive information on the Community Facility Enhancement Program?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm astounded by the type of question being presented by the member from Edmonton Whitemud. Of all the programs that this government is associated with, probably the one that has the greatest amount of publicity attached to it is the Community Facility Enhancement Program. There is an outstanding pamphlet, Mr. Speaker, that was published a year ago when the Premier of the province of Alberta announced that the government is committed to supporting the family and in all of its forms, because Alberta is committed to the family. Every application that comes my way when it is approved, Mr. Speaker, is issued with a press release. At every project in the province of Alberta that is approved, there's a great big sign, probably 4 feet by 8 feet, that says Community Facility Enhancement Program on it. A tribute to the volunteers in the province of Alberta. At each presentation of a check for approval, Mr. Speaker, there's a presentation plaque. Mr. Speaker, there are countless numbers of press releases that have gone out. In fact, to August 8, 1989, we've now approved some 686 projects at nearly $25 million. I have countless number of newspaper articles presented to me from around the province of Alberta with people saying, thank you, what a wonderful program. In the case of Edmonton Whitemud, Mr. Speaker, there have been 8 projects approved at a total value of $101,000. $100,000. It is truly unfortunate that the member from Edmonton Whitemud does not know what is happening in his constituency.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, could the Minister possibly explain why on all those press releases he's referring to, that it refers specifically to himself and the Premier if it's in the constituency for a non-government member, whereas if in the constituency for a government member, then the local Tory MLA is invited to attend the presentation and be part of that celebration. Why the double standard, Mr. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, the form of government that we function under is the British parliamentary form of government. In this Assembly, there are MLAs. All members in this Assembly are members of the Legislative Assembly, Mr. Speaker, but only a certain number of the members of this Assembly, Mr. Speaker, are members of the government. This is a government program, Mr. Speaker. This is a program that opposition members of the Liberal Party and the New Democratic Party ridiculed, Mr. Speaker, and said was a terrible program. They were opposed to helping the family, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's no way that they are going to piggyback on the back of a government program.
Order. Before the chair recognizes the member for Edmonton Whitemud on the final supplementary, the chair also wants to point out that one of the members called out the word slimy, and that's not really parliamentary. Let's not have that stuff. Thank you. Edmonton Whitemud.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, is the Minister admitting that this program is being used as nothing but a government slush fund?
Mr. Speaker, this program is committed to supporting the family in all of its forms because Albertans understand that the family is the strongest resource our province has. Mr. Speaker, if what the honourable member from Edmonton Whitemud has said, and if he really believes it is true, then perhaps in the next few days when I file a motion for return which lists all of the projects that have been approved, he will be rather embarrassed to know that in constituencies such as West Loch Sturgeon, 13 projects have been approved at a total costing of $680,000. Mr. Speaker, this is incredible. Just 3 minutes ago, I indicated to the member from Whitemud that 8 projects were approved at a total of $101,000. Not less than 3 minutes ago, Mr. Speaker, I said that. I suggest to the honourable member from Whitemud, it is time that if he chose to raise the question, he should at least have the decency of listening to the answer so that he would not waste the time of the House.
Thank you. Lessers. West Loch Sturgeon, we have no member in the House by the name of Ken. Lucky him. Lesser Slave Lake, followed by Edmonton Centre, then Edmonton Meadowlark, and then Lord Minster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the past few weeks when the rains came down, many of my constituents had grave concerns about possible flooding. Some communities came close to flooding. In fact, some were flooded. Would the Minister of Environment outline what is being done to mitigate future flooding in these areas?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as we all know, there were heavy rains in north-central Alberta in the last few weeks or so. We have 2 programs. One is the Water Management and Erosion Control Program, and the other is the Surface Water Development Program. Both these programs are designed to manage water and manage flood control programs. Some $6 million will be spent this year, ostensibly in north-central Alberta. 26 projects are in the works right now, and hopefully as the program continues, we will be able to alleviate some of the problems that have occurred relative to flooding in north-central Alberta.
To the Minister again. If in fact these programs are in place, how do the communities access these programs so that they may take preventative action in the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess the best way to access the program, and this applies to the opposition too, they're welcome to access the program the same way, is through their local MLA.
To the Minister of Public Works, Safety and Supply? Or Public Works, Supply and Safety? What is the safety for the public living in these areas?
Mr. Speaker, Alberta Environment, through its River Forecast Centre, puts out periodic warnings when there's a situation that may develop that would cause acute flooding in a particular area. And such, of course, was the case a week or so ago when acute rains fell in the Swan Hills area in the province, and the water drifted both north and south of the Swan Hills. And of course, those precautions were put in place. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, there is, with every municipal government in the province of Alberta, a disaster-related manual that they have. And periodically, these local officials are trained at the training center that we have here in Edmonton with Alberta Public Safety Services to ensure that local municipal leaders, firemen, local policemen, and other lay people in the community who want to get involved in this area of response receive training with respect to it. So when there is a possibility of a disaster occurring, the nature of flooding or acute rainfall, these local people will get together, extrapolate the information they have. They'll have all the phone numbers and the contact numbers. Alberta Environment, Alberta Public Safety Services, and other agencies of the government will convey as up-to-date information as possible to the local people. And of course, then there's a fan-out system in the local area.
Member for Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As well as the trafficking in illegal drugs, we also have a major problem in this province with respect to the sale of prescription and over-the-counter drugs. Albertans pay more for drugs than residents in any other province, and generic equivalents of brand-name drugs, which can save us potentially up to $14 million annually, are used in Alberta less than 5% of the time, which is in fact the lowest rate in Canada. Given that the Department of Health is currently negotiating an agreement with the Pharmaceutical Association and with Blue Cross, has the Minister of Health instructed her representative to propose systems such as a set formulary or best available price system, which will ensure the maximum use of generic equivalents, thus saving Albertans millions of dollars?
Great idea. Certainly, I have, Mr. Speaker.
Since the government, Mr. Speaker, covers the cost of prescription drugs for social allowance recipients, seniors, and others through the Blue Cross plan, how can the minister justify incurring these higher costs, despite what her representative might be doing down the line? How can she justify these current higher costs when even hospitals in the province see the wisdom in administering lower-cost generic equivalent drugs to patients in their hospital beds?
Right on. Well, Mr. Speaker, number one, there is no clear evidence that Alberta drug prices are the highest in the country. Certainly, the use of generic drugs is something we are exploring, but the honourable member should not be under the delusion that generic equivalents are always the same as a prescribed drug. And certainly where they can be used as an equivalent, we must encourage that to take place.
Well, we're getting somewhere, Mr. Speaker. This minister learns quickly. Insofar as the major pharmaceutical companies are extremely adept in their marketing methods, including giving physicians free prescription pads with the words "no substitution" marked on them, what is the Minister of Health doing in this regard to curb these abuses which profit unfairly off of the health care needs of Albertans?
Mr. Speaker, I do not write prescriptions for drugs, and I am not a physician who makes the decision on whether a drug should be used or not used. Nonetheless, with respect to the great deal of dollars that this province dedicates to drug services, particularly for seniors, the whole issue is being reviewed very carefully with the view to getting the best value out of the dollars we do spend for drugs in this province, and I will be happy to report to the House when some of those negotiations are concluded.
Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Lloydminster, then Calgary Forest Lawn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while the environmental impact assessment process for the Athabasca pulp mill is seriously flawed at least it does include an environmental review panel, public hearings, some public intervenor funding, and federal participation, such as these elements are. Oddly enough, the minister has not required these elements for the Alberta Energy Project at Slave Lake, for the Procter & Gamble expansion, for the Weldwood Project, for the Diashowa Project. To the Minister of the Environment, will he require environmental review panels with public hearings, intervenor funding, and federal participation for each of these projects? And if not, why not?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest the honourable member either hop in his car or get an airplane or do something, and or do both if he can, and examine these sites. He will see in the case of the Diashowa project, it's half built. In the case of the Weldwood project, it's probably 3/4 built. The environmental impact assessment that was required then has now been complete. As economic diversification through forestry projects continues in this province, so does the process of environmental impact assessment continue to be improved. And that's exactly what is happening with the Alberta Pacific project. And we're going to examine and assess that particular review process. And if it works well, I'll say again, for at least the 6th or 7th time, that will serve as a model for other environmental impact assessment processes for future projects.
It's clearly not too late to avoid an environmental disaster, given that these things haven't been completed. Since the minister is obviously, as he says, using the ALPAC process as his test model, how can he allow the other projects to proceed before he has determined how well this process has served Albertans and whether, in fact, it should be applied to these other projects before some form of disaster is allowed to happen?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, the standards are in place, and all the pulp mill projects, those that are under construction and those that are proposed, will have to meet the standards, which are world standard, leading-edge standards relative to environmental technology. That's a fact. With respect to the projects that are under construction, it would be very, very difficult now, having received their construction or their permits to construct. It would be very, very difficult now for them to go back and do an environmental impact assessment, having already been through the process under the rules of the day. You know, I think that we've got to play fair, and we can't very well expect those people who played by the rules of the day, who played fairly by the rules of the day, go back halfway through the completion of their projects and start to play by brand new rules.
Mr. Speaker, you just did that for Diashowa to ensure that they'd meet the new standards halfway through their construction. Let's be consistent. Will the minister explain, for example, what is so different about the Alberta Energy Company project that he is hesitating, because it's not under construction, that he is hesitating to require a process at least consistent with the one that he has patched together for the Athabasca pulp mill project?
Mr. Speaker, it hasn't been patched together or hatched together. It has evolved in a very, very orderly fashion and will prove out to be a very, very useful exercise, one that perhaps the honourable member should pay attention to. With respect to the Alberta Energy Company chemical thermomechanical project at Slave Lake, this was a project that was not earmarked by my predecessor. There was only one project that was earmarked for the public review process, because it pertained more specifically to bleach craft mills. There was an undertaking by my predecessor to examine and to use the Athabasca Alberta Pacific project at Athabasca as the model for the public hearing process, and on the basis of that undertaking, we instituted the public hearing for the Alberta Pacific project, and the Alberta Energy Company.
Order. Thank you. Order.
Edmonton Meadowlark, you know you get 3 questions, not 5, as you've now been shouting across the way. Thank you, Westlock. Lloydminster, Calgary Forest Lawn, Westlock Sturgeon, perhaps, and Athabasca Lac La Biche.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Energy. The Federal Minister of Finance has released the details of the federal goods and services tax. The Alberta government has worked with the oil and gas industry to proceed on the Oslo and the Lloydminster bi-provincial upgrader projects, 2 projects which involve high capital input costs and considerable contracting with Alberta companies for goods and services. Can the Minister provide the House with his assessment of the new tax on the Lloydminster upgrader and the Oslo projects?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be pleased to do that. As I indicated outside the House yesterday, our department is doing an evaluation on the impact of the goods and service tax, and we will be coming up with some results as we further understand the impact of this particular tax, and I guess as Ottawa further understands the impact of the tax. I should say, Mr. Speaker, that the message that I want to leave with regard to those 2 projects is that I do not at this point believe that the GST will deal a fatal blow to the projects. In fact, I do not believe that, but I should also point out that price is the ultimate determinant of whether or not these projects are viable. Mr. Speaker, we must not, however, ignore the inflationary nature of the GST in 1991. And when we talk about that the inflationary nature of that particular tax, we must consider the fact that, as my honourable colleague, the provincial treasurer, points out, this has a very real impact, a negative impact on interest rates. That is, that it could engender higher interest rates. As the member for Lloydminster points out, that is very significant on a capital-intensive project like Oslo, $4.1 billion, and also on wage settlements, Mr. Speaker. Traditionally, as taxes like this are brought in, it does have an inflationary impact on the consumer price index, and wage settlements tend to try and recapture some of this extraordinary type taxation. And when you have tens of thousands of people involved in the construction of a project like Oslo and Lloydminster, you have to take that into consideration when you're looking at your economics.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. The decision to proceed with these projects was based on the projects being fundamentally economic when one takes into account capital costs, construction costs, and market forecasts. How does this tax affect the decision to proceed with these projects?
Mr. Speaker, as I did indicate, the ultimate determinant of the viability of Lloydminster, the upgrader, and of the decision by the Oslo participants to proceed will be price. And with regard to Oslo, that price determination date is in 1991. I would like to indicate that both projects are proceeding, and they're proceeding well, and all parties are committed to the furtherance of these projects, the federal government, the provincial government, and the participants. We must, however, keep in mind some of the issues that I've just addressed, because if the price is not as high as we'd like to see it in 1991 with regard to Oslo, then these issues do impact that decision, because they will have an effect. As we see it now, and as our projections indicate now, we are confident these projects will proceed, but we must not lose sight of the macroeconomic impact of this very, very poorly conceived tax.
Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Royalty Tax Credit Program has cost Albertans up to $400 million a year, with little tangible evidence that there's been benefit commensurate with dollars spent. The minister earlier in this session promised that he would review the program. The minister could target the program more effectively to small producers and save Albertan taxpayers money if he would raise the percentage of rebate from 75% to 95% and reduce the royalty ceiling cap from its current $3 million to $500,000. Is it the minister's intention to introduce such a reform?
Mr. Speaker, I have met on a continual basis with representatives of the industry with respect to the Alberta Royalty Tax Credit Program, and some of the suggestions or recommendations that the member for Forest Lawn makes are ones that are not unlike we get from various companies in the industry, and I appreciate his interest in this particular program. I should say, though, Mr. Speaker, that his preamble indicated that this royalty tax credit program is not sensitive to activity. If he believes that, he is not talking to the industry, Mr. Speaker.
Further suggestion, Mr. Speaker, for the minister would be to limit the number of times a corporation could take advantage of this program. Is it the minister's intention to introduce that into any reforms that he might introduce with respect to ARTC?
Mr. Speaker, that is a matter of jurisdiction for the provincial treasurer. He and I are in discussions on that particular matter, and we will be dealing with it in short order. It may or may not be a part of an overall package for ARTC. ARTC, as we've indicated before in this House and to the industry, will move to a price-sensitive regime in 1990, January of that particular year, and we will be very deliberate, and we will consider all of the input we get from industry before we do announce a program. Some of the suggestions the honourable member have made, as I indicated, are not unlike many of the suggestions that are coming from the industry today.
Given that there's a lot of unnecessary public money spent in this program, will the minister give any consideration to advancing his date for bringing his changes forward?
Mr. Speaker, I indicated earlier in response to the member that this money is not spent unwisely. This money is very important to the health of particularly the smaller producers. I can tell you that there are a number of smaller producers in this province that rely quite heavily on the Alberta Royalty Tax Credit Program. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I know of small producers and explorers where the ARTC revenue that flows back to them, the credit in that program, accounts for up to 90% of their cash flow. So for this honourable member to suggest that he is standing up for the small producer and at the same time saying that these dollars are not important to the small producer, he's not talking to the industry, Mr. Speaker.
Time for question period has expired. Chair would point out that the final supplementary of the member for Edmonton Glengarry was out of order under Beauchesne 410 subsection 17. Ministers may not be questioned with respect to party responsibilities. Orders of the day. Might we have unanimous consent to revert to the introduction of special guests? Opposed?